Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story, The Great Cryptid Hunt. My brother is missing. He has been gone for the better part of 2 years. This wouldn't be unusual for Gary, though. We grew up together, separated by only a few years. He was always the adventurous one, courageous, brave, and intelligent, the worst combination for an older brother. Everybody loved and admired him, and I lived in his shadow. Most people would be resentful, but Gary was a character who raised those around him. I always knew he would end up making a positive difference in the world. When he told me he was going to be away for a few months, the summer of my senior year, I wasn't surprised. He had been involved with a statewide operation which led to the seizure of a large amount of narcotics. He was an investigative journalist and had spent months working from the inside to build a case for the local police. The next big case was another year undercover, working to tear down an arms dealer. The group were supplying and fueling gang wars, profiting from the lives of men killed by the weapons he put in their hands. He told me some details over drinks one night over the holidays. He didn't say much until late into the night. He told me how involved he needed to be to get into a position to know the head of the operation. Things he didn't like to reminisce on for too long. It was the same night that he told me about his next assignment. He was working on bringing down a worldwide organization who arranged big game hunting trips for seedy individuals. I met him a couple of months later, and he told me he was leaving the country to meet up with the group. That was the last I heard from him until today. I received an email this morning from an unknown sender. The subject title said, "For the attention of the big fella." I normally would delete these on receipt, but the title caught my attention. Gary had always called me the big fella since I passed him in height at 15. I am about an inch taller than him and wouldn't be considered the big fella by any means. The email contained a text file and journal detailing his time spent with the group. The text file just said the following: "I don't think I'm going to make it back from this one, big fella. The latter is why I have reached out to you. I fear something terrible has happened. I am trying to track down his location from any clues hidden in these files. Unfortunately, I have to piece together the story from fragmented documents. I'm hoping one of you may be able to help locate him." May 5th, 2022. Last week I received the notification to meet in a small town in North Dakota. It was addressed to Mr. Jonathan Marley, the alias in which I have been communicating under. The letter was stamped with a golden view at the head of the page. There was a list of essentials such as camping equipment, warm clothing, and hunting equipment. Food would be provided on site before departure. There was a highlighted asterisk beside hunting equipment. It said if bringing your own weaponry, rifle and sidearm must be compatible with .308 and 9mm caliber respectively. Weapons will be provided on departure if requirements cannot be met. The request felt strange to me, but I knew this group was very exclusive in admission and presumed it was part of their procedures to remain anonymous. The final part of the note stated the next part of the trip would be confirmed on the day. Our meeting point is situated on the outskirts of a forest. The town seems abandoned other than the people from the Venators, Latin for the hunters. A mix of men and women equipped in military-grade gear, quite heavy-duty for a simple hunting expedition. The main spokesperson for the Venators was a broad man called Crane. He wore a dusty black cowboy hat pulled down to his eyes. His right cheek had 3 prominent scars running towards his top lip. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on the first Great Cryptid Hunt. This adventure will bring us into contact with the most prestigious prey known to man. I wasn't sure what he meant by cryptid, but the other 10 people who seemed to be joining the party didn't look too confused by this. I'd just like to remind you all that this hunt is partaken at your own risk. I'm presuming you have the necessary precautions in place if something were to go wrong. A slight murmur of agreement from the crowd allowed Crane to continue. This is your last chance to pull out. Once I name our first intended target, there is no going back. Please return to your vehicle and leave if you have any doubt about your commitment. He eyed the group, intensely waiting for our response. When no one backed away, he smiled. With that, we are bound to the hunt. He raised a fist in triumph. Go collect your ammunition from the table to your left. Silver bullets are the only thing that can take down a Wendigo. The group set out as the sun reached its peak. Crane, the only member of the Venators. The others were to hold down base camp and come to our aid if the need arose. They also were arranging transport for the next trip to Ireland. For members of the gang split off to the right. A hushed but frantic discussion barely audible. Marco, the son of an Italian superyacht distributor, was accompanied by his partner Lola and 2 friends, Antonio and Michael, all of whom were reassuring Lola that this trip was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the magical creatures walk among us. I was unsure how anyone would describe a Wendigo as magical from the stories you would hear on the internet. My expectations for this hunt have reduced dramatically. The thoughts of uncovering a huge illegal hunting enterprise have tethered out as I realized we will be hunting a planted elk with a soundbox attached. It's hard to comprehend how the Venators have managed to pull the wool over the eyes of so many wealthy and prominent figures. For the sake of my cover, I know I will need to play my role in this trip, but I'm hopeful that I may depart before the next destination. Where is the next leg of the trip, by the way? I called out to Crane, who led the party as we broke through the tree line. Ah yes, I knew I was forgetting something. He turned to address us. The next target is a mythical siren who calls out to announce the passing of loved ones. A banshee? Joshua questioned in a thick Texan accent. He too adorned a cowboy hat, but his was polished and new. You got it in one, Mr. Williams. Crane clapped his hands enthusiastically. You hear that, Junior? We're heading to Ireland. Joshua clapped his son on the back as the two discussed the terrain they may have to deal with while hunting a banshee. Joshua Jr., or J.J. as he was known, was the spitting image of his father, albeit about half his size. J.J. needed every bit of his belt loop to keep his trousers above his ankles. As night fell, we made our camp in a clearing that Crane had spotted. We'll take turns on duty tomorrow night, if it takes that long. Tonight, I'll let you get some rest. No need to be the hero, Crane. Each one of us is experienced enough to keep a fire going. Crane dismissed the remark with some reassuring words on how he was well rested and would enjoy the tasks. That seemed to settle Joshua, as he felt there was no questioning of his abilities. I took out my notepad to scribble down my thoughts on the day so far. I was running through ideas of how the Venators were concocting this fraudulent trip when J approached. Are you working on your checklist? He asked as he sat down beside me. No, just journaling the day. I like to get my thoughts down while they're still fresh. My response didn't seem to register with J.J. Me and Pops have most things checked off already. Lions, elephants, cheetahs, even a grizzly or two. J.J. seemed to be reminiscing as he asked, have you ever encountered anything of this kind before? Not even in the slightest. It was an honest response. I'm aware of how much it cost to get involved with the Venators, and J.J. and his father had paid double. I didn't want to be the one to break the news that what we were searching for was no more than a dud. We saw something like this on our farm a couple of years back. Kept terrorizing our cattle. Tore some of them to pieces, so it did. He looked over towards his father. Pops didn't know what to do. He shot the son of a bitch damn near 10 times. It just kept coming back. Ended up having to call Mr. Bolton. He gestured to another member of our group who sat alone cleaning his rifle. Caleb Bolton was a dark-skinned man with cat-like eyes. He had his head shaved to the skin. A tree trunk-like neck was in proportion to the rest of his body. Mr. Bolton came late one night and set off into the darkness. The next morning he came back covered in blood and deep gashes. He walked right up to Pa and said, "It's been dealt with," and just walked right off. Pop slipped him an envelope worth more than all the cows on the farm. He went off into the distance, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. I looked over Caleb, wondering what brought a man like him here, only to notice he was staring right back. The night wore on with nothing to report. We settled in and went to sleep as Crane looked out into the forest. I woke up late into the night as a sharp stick I missed nearly punctured my lung as I rolled over. I could see Crane sitting with his back to a tree, face illuminated by the glow of his cigarette. "Can't sleep, Mr. Marley?" Crane asked as he fished another cigarette out of his pack and handed it to me. "You can call me Jonathan," I said as I lit the cigarette. I sat down beside him looking out over the camp. "Will the fire not attract the Wendigo?" I asked, gesturing to the crackling blaze in the center of the sleeping bags. "No need to worry about that, Jonathan." Crane tipped the ashes onto a stone beside him and pointed across the camp into a dense area of trees. "He's been following us since we got here." Crane's words stayed with me as I lay awake. There was a small part of me that was truly scared. The part that was largely present as a child when the darkness held shadows of figures you couldn't comprehend. His demeanor would convince most that we truly were dealing with a creature of the supernatural. I left his side feeling as if we were the ones being hunted. Full of mixed emotions, I tossed and turned for what seemed like hours. My skepticism battling hard against the situation I had found myself in. The forest added to my unease. Branches rustled as a slight breeze blew through the camp. The debate playing out in my mind was silenced by a strangled scream that echoed through the encampment. "Where's Lucas?" Ellie asked as she ripped out of her sleeping bag, grabbing her husband Levi by the shoulders. Levi gathered up his rifle and started towards the location of the uproar, calling out for his son. Caleb and Crane are already ahead of him. I followed after bringing the handgun I had under my pillow. Caleb and Crane split off in separate directions, directing each other through pointing and gestures. They encircled an area 15 feet from where I stood. Crane surveyed the area thoroughly as Caleb scanned the trees. "Something was here all right, but I don't think it was your son." Crane looked at Levi, his face full of concern. That sense of dread intensified. Marco and Antonio came rushing towards us, the faces slick with sweat. "Lucas is okay. He was just going to the toilet," Marco said, panting. "He came back not long after you left. We weren't sure what to do, so we came to get you," Antonio said, hunching over from the extension. Levi let out a sigh of relief as he made his way over to thank the guys for bringing the good news. I turned to Crane to ask him what he thought could have made the noise, but the color had drained from his face. "We have to get back now, Da." Crane pushed past us at full sprint, heading in the direction of camp. "It seems we have been fooled," Caleb said, much more calmly than the situation deserved. We raced through the trees, receiving nicks and cuts as we ran without hesitation. I was pulling away from the main group, just keeping pace with Crane and Caleb, my arms pumping like pistons working to their max. The two in front didn't seem to be putting much effort in their stride, yet they ate up the ground like a marathon runner on his first mile. They were discussing what they might find on our return, but I was too focused on filling my lungs with deep breaths to hear what they were saying. They burst into camp, frightening the 4 remaining members who looked perfectly fine sitting around the fireplace. Jesus Christ, Crane, you frightened me half to death. Michael was gripping his rifle tightly as the others shrank in behind him. Levi was next to break the clearing, overjoyed to see his family safe and well. Ellie went over to greet him. As she stretched out her arm to take his hand in hers, Lucas let out a cry of panic. Her arm never made it far enough to embrace her husband. The Wendigo burst out from the shadows, grabbing Ellie by the arm and tearing it off, and he flung her down on the moss-covered floor. She bounced with the force, but managed to remain conscious as the beast reared his fangs in her face. The sight of the creature made my blood turn to ice. It was humanoid in some respects, although its limbs were elongated beyond belief. Its ribs protruded its sides, stretching its pale skin to bursting point. Blood ran down its face and chest as it tore a chunk from the arm in which it held. It seemed to stare into my soul as I froze in place, awaiting certain death. Michael aimed at the monstrous figure, but pulled his shot. The bullet struck Ellie in the temple. On reflection, I believe it to be an act of mercy from whatever God looks down upon us. The Wendigo screamed in anger and flung Ellie's body towards us. It crashed into Lucas, knocking him back several feet, his mother's blood covering him in a shower of crimson. My stomach emptied itself of any contents left from dinner. The Wendigo stomped towards us, true evil glistening in the moonlight. Levi managed to pull himself from his daze once he noticed the creature heading towards his son. He looked at his wife's corpse and pure rage boiled over. He tackles the Wendigo with all his might, knocking the beast back into the fire. It tripped over as its right foot caught a blaze. Levi fell on top of it and unloaded the clip of his pistol into the creature's chest. For every bullet he fired, the Wendigo tore off a strip of flesh. His chest was opened first, a mist of red spraying into the night sky. His face was the next to go. Teeth were launched 10 feet in all directions. Levi kept firing through this brutal assault. As the hammer clicked empty, not much remained to identify Levi. His rage-fueled attack cost him his life. The Wendigo pushed the remains of Levi to the side and clambered to its feet. The silver bullets lodged into his chest were bringing this monster closer to its final breath. "Steady now," Crane called out as he raised his sights. "On my mark." Lucas roared as he ran towards the Wendigo. He brandished a blade from its sheath with murderous intentions. I tried to grab him as he raised the blade for the killing blow. I could see what looked like a grin on the face of the Wendigo through the large, gaping hole of Lucas's chest. The Wendigo had punched through, tearing his heart out in one swift motion. "For fuck's sake," Crane said in disbelief. "Fire!" The forest erupted in a cacophony of gunfire as bits of Wendigo were torn apart. It crumpled to the ground, relishing in the delight to gain one more soul before it fell. Crane dropped his rifle and walked back to his tree where his cigarettes once were. He picked up the tattered box which had been destroyed in the melee. I offered him one of mine as we sat by the tree, soaked in the blood of many. "And then there was 7, he said as he ignited his match on the stricker box. Second story. Humanoid creature sighting in rural Smiley/Yorktown, Texas. This is the story of the scariest moment of my life. It's been a few months since I experienced this sighting, but I'm still terrified to go out at night due to seeing what I saw. About 3 months ago, I had moved onto an 11-acre property in rural Texas, specifically between Yorktown and Smiley. The entire plot of land was about 3 to 4 times the size of the lot we purchased, but nobody had purchased any of the other portions while we were there. The land was fresh, never had been built on before, and didn't even have an address. It was surrounded solely by oil pumps on neighboring properties. At night, you could see the burn-off from them lighting part of the sky orange. Our house was a bare-bones tiny house. No walls, just wooden beams and a bare floor. No running water, no plumbing. We had to dig the electric ourselves from the pole all the way to the house. That's how new the property was. It was a miserable experience all around. But we're poor, and it was the only living situation we could find. I have never been a believer of the paranormal. I still don't believe in things like ghosts or demons. If I see it, I'll believe it person. After this experience, though, I'm definitely more open to these types of things. What I saw I just call the creature. Creative, I know. Well, when I moved onto the property, there were weird anomalies in technology that started to happen. Phones would glitch out and stop working, the cameras would act strange, and parked cars that were turned off would suddenly chime and the lights would turn on. I thought it was odd, but I never connected it to the property until my girlfriend mentioned the strange happenings later on after my sighting. One night soon after I moved there, I had to get something out of my car. I took my phone light and walked out, opened the car door, and started digging around in the glove box with my full focus on finding what I was looking for. I forgot exactly what it was that I was searching for. After looking for a little while and not finding it, I closed the door and shone my light back towards the house. There was a truck parked between me and the door to the house. As I shone my light towards the truck, I became instantly terrified. What I saw was a tall, 7 to 8 feet, humanoid creature with white, sort of sickly-looking skin. Its arms and legs looked longer than a human's. As I shone my light in that direction, it ran off. It had the capability to leap over the truck, landing in the bed momentarily before hopping over the other edge and disappearing beyond my sight. I distinctly remember how the truck shook when it nimbly jumped over it. The time it took to do that was about 4 to 5 seconds. I never got to see its face, and I'm glad I didn't, as I would probably be even more traumatized than I already am. I can only imagine what its face looked like. Would it have reflective eyes, like an animal? I still wonder in fear. Instead of stepping in the car and locking the door, I quickly walked around the truck and into the house, like an idiot. I was so terrified that when I stepped around the truck it would be there waiting for me. Luckily, it wasn't. For the rest of the night I was absolutely horrified, as well as the rest of the time that I lived there, which was only about a month. I would have thought, okay, maybe I just imagined it, but it was so clear to me. Even the fact that the truck shook was a detail that was too realistic to be my imagination. And I have one more thing. I wasn't the only one who saw it. My girlfriend saw it out the window at one point, though not as clearly as I had seen it. She did some digging, and other people have seen a similar creature in the area. That makes it clear to me that what I saw was real. I still doubt it to some degree, because how could it be real? But I can't see any other way to explain it. I still wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't turned around when I did. It seemed like it might have been stalking me or something. I can only imagine in terror what it might have done to me if I hadn't turned around and saw it. I'm honestly traumatized from this experience, as silly as that may seem. I feel embarrassed saying that, but it's true. I know sightings like this to me before I experienced it myself would just make me think, these people are crazy, or they're making it up for attention/fame and are faking. But now I'm more open-minded towards people's experiences. I don't want to be famous. I just want someone to know what I experienced that night. I want to know what it is that I might have seen. If anyone has an idea, please let me know what you think. I'm never moving to the countryside again. Ever. I'd rather get stabbed by some homeless Austinite than live out there and die from that creature. Third story. Climate change woke up something worse than nightmares. The wind howled like a banshee as we huddled in the skeleton of an old miner's shack, our breaths misting the frigid air. I clutched my arms around myself, feeling the cold seep into my bones. Despite the layers of thermal clothing, the icy fingers of fear crept along my spine, not just from the cold, but from the unnerving knowledge that the Wendigo prowled out there, somewhere in the swirling snow. Damn it, James. We can't just sit here and wait for that thing to pick us off. Tom's voice cut through the tense silence, sharp as the icicles dangling from the splintered roof beams. Quiet, Tom, I hissed, casting a wary glance towards the windows, their glass long shattered, leaving only gaping maws that allowed the relentless wind to invade our sanctuary. We need to conserve energy and stay warm. Our best chance is to remain calm and think this through. Think it through? Sam scoffed, her dark eyes flashing with frustration. While you think, whatever is out there is getting closer. She gestured to the empty, snow-choked streets of the abandoned mining town, each building a tombstone in this graveyard of human endeavor. Sam's right, Izzy chimed in, her voice trembling. Her youthful optimism had been replaced by raw fear, and it pained me to see her so vulnerable. We need a plan, not just hope. Hope might be all we have left, Nathan murmured from the shadows, where he sat apart from the group, cradling a worn copy of a geological survey like a talisman against the unknown. Hope doesn't fortify doors, Nathan, Ollie grunted, already moving to barricade the entrance with whatever debris he could find. Rotted planks, rusted mining equipment, remnants of lives long forgotten. I watched the team fracture before my eyes, each person retreating into their own brand of despair. My heart pounded a frenzied rhythm, echoing the urgency of our situation. We were a group of brilliant minds, experts in our respective fields, yet here we were, outmatched by the primal horror of the Wendigo, a creature that defied explanation, a monster born from the very essence of hunger and cold. Listen to me, everyone, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. We can't let fear divide us. We've faced challenges before, but none like this. Together, we've got a chance. Alone, we're as good as dead. They looked at me then, their expressions a tapestry of doubt and desperation. But beneath it all, I saw the flicker of resolve. We were survivors, each and every one of us. Whether facing the unrelenting forces of nature or staring down the stuff of nightmares, we had always found a way. James is right, Tom conceded, though the set of his jaw told me his pride took a hit. Let's figure this out. Together. Agreed, Sam said, nodding curtly, but let's make it quick. That thing out there isn't going to wait for us to reach a consensus. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath that did little to quell the unease coiling in my gut. First, we secure this place as best we can. Then, we'll come up with an exit strategy. We're not going down without a fight. As they sprang into action, boarding up windows and sealing cracks, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that the Wendigo was more than just a predator. It was the embodiment of this harsh, unforgiving land, a symbol of the struggle between humanity and the dark, insatiable void. And in that moment, the true horror struck me. Even as we fought for survival, we were being hunted by something far older and more terrifying than any storm or beast of prey. Something that wouldn't rest until it had consumed us all. A howl split the silence, slicing through the wind's mournful cries like a knife. We froze, the warmth we'd fought to kindle now a forgotten ember in the face of such primal terror. Our breaths hung suspended, crystalline puffs that seemed too loud in the newfound hush following that dreadful sound. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. But our wide-eyed stares spoke volumes. The feral call had confirmed what we secretly dreaded. We were not alone in this ghost town. Inside now. Ollie's voice cut through the paralyzing fear with the sharpness of a commander rallying his troops. His deep-set eyes darted around, seeking out shadows that might be harboring our unseen hunter. Sam was the first to react, her survival instincts kicking in as she ushered us toward the nearest dilapidated building. "Split up," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the mounting gale. "Look for tracks, any sign it left behind." I found myself nodding, the researcher part of my brain clicking into gear despite the dread pooling in my stomach. I glanced at Dr. Montgomery, who met my gaze with a grim determination. There was no question about it. We had to find a safe place to hide before the Wendigo did more than just announce its presence. "Tom, Izzy, you're with me." Dr. Montgomery's command was calm, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. The young biologist nodded, her usual vibrancy dimmed by the gravity of our situation. Tom, still wearing traces of his earlier bravado, stepped up with a determined clench to his jaw. "Ollie, Nathan, you're with me," Sam ordered. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, a silent promise that we'd watch each other's backs, and then she was leading her group away, their footsteps crunching against the snow. Left in the biting cold, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. As the leader of my small faction, I steered us toward the shadowy interior of what once must have been the town's general store. Quick and quiet, I instructed, my voice trembling despite my efforts. Inside, the darkness was oppressive, the only light coming from the gaps in the boarded-up windows. "Check the back," I told Tom, who nodded and disappeared behind a row of empty shelves, his flashlight a small beacon in the gloom. "Anything?" I called softly after a moment, my own flashlight sweeping across the dusty floor, looking for evidence of intrusion or escape. "Nothing here," Tom replied, re-emerging with a shake of his head. "It's clear." "Then we secure this spot," I decided, feeling the walls for sturdiness. They would have to do. But even as I checked for weaknesses in our temporary refuge, the echo of that haunting cry lingered in my ears, a stark reminder that the Wendigo was out there, somewhere, and we were in its domain now. A crimson streak in the snow snagged my gaze, a stark contrast to the surrounding whiteness. My breath hitched, frost clinging to my scarf as I crouched beside the gruesome trail. "Over here," I hissed, signaling the others with a mix of urgency and dread. Tom and Izzy joined me at the crimson-stained snow, their faces pale in the dim light. The trail led away from the general store, disappearing into the howling wilderness beyond. I could feel the tension mounting in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the danger we faced. "Is that blood?" Izzy's voice quivered, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. "It looks fresh," Tom observed, his breath forming misty clouds in the frigid air. "We have to follow it." A chill crept down my spine as I realized what this meant. The Wendigo was not just a distant threat. It was here, among us, its hunger manifest in this macabre path it had left behind. "We stick together," I ordered, my own voice betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "Stay close and stay quiet." With grim determination, we set off into the unforgiving landscape, where shadows danced like sinister specters in the twisting light of the fading day. Each step left a mark in the pristine snow, a reminder of our presence in this desolate place. The trail of blood led us deeper into the heart of the abandoned town, past crumbling buildings and broken remnants of lives interrupted by some ancient horror. As we followed the ominous path, a sense of unease settled over us like a suffocating blanket. The wind whispered through skeletal branches, carrying with it a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into our very souls. I could see the fear reflected in my companion's eyes, a silent understanding passing between us that we were treading on ground tainted by something far more sinister than we had ever encountered. The trail eventually led us to an old mine shaft, its yawning maw gaping like the hungry jaws of some forgotten beast. The air around it seemed to grow colder, the very atmosphere thick with dread. I exchanged a wary glance with Tom and Izzy, their expressions mirroring my own apprehension. Whatever lurked within that mine was a mystery we were compelled to unravel, even as every instinct screamed at us to turn back and flee. "We can't go in there," Izzy's voice quavered, her hands trembling at her sides. "We have to," Tom insisted, his tone firm despite the fear lurking in his eyes. "If we want to have any chance of surviving this, we need to confront whatever's causing this chaos head-on." I nodded, my jaw set in grim determination. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath to steady my nerves, I took the lead, venturing into the darkness of the mine shaft. The air grew thick with dust, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls like ominous whispers. As we delved deeper into the belly of the mine, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The walls seemed to close in around us, suffocating and oppressive. Every shadow held untold horrors that threatened to spring forth at any moment, shrouded in the darkness that enveloped us like a suffocating cloak. The stench of decay hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood that clung to the walls in streaked patterns, a macabre mural of terror. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a thunderous reminder of our vulnerability in this desolate place. I could feel the weight of gazes watching us from unseen corners, a palpable malevolence that made my skin crawl. A soft whimper from Izzy broke the silence, her grip on my arm tightening as we pressed forward into the unknown depths of the mine. Tom's breath hitched beside me, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand as we navigated the labyrinthine tunnels that seemed to twist and turn endlessly. And then, a sudden shift in the shadows ahead caught my attention. A subtle movement, fleeting yet unmistakable. I raised a hand to halt our progress, my heart hammering in my chest as I strained to see through the murky darkness. The faint sound of shuffling echoed off the walls, sending a shiver down my spine. "Did you see that?" Tom's voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes wide with apprehension. Before I could respond, a low growl reverberated through the tunnel, chilling me to the core. The air seemed to thicken with an otherworldly presence, suffused with a primal malice that prickled at my skin. I gestured for silence, my grip tightening on the flashlight as I slowly advanced, every nerve on edge. As we crept closer, the shadows seemed to coalesce into a grotesque figure hunched over in the darkness. Antlers twisted like gnarled branches adorned its skeletal frame, and the stench of decay grew overpowering. The Wendigo stood before us, its eyes gleaming with a hunger that sent a bolt of terror through my veins. Time seemed to slow as we beheld the grotesque form before us, a monstrous fusion of man and beast that defied all reason and sanity. Its gaunt limbs were twisted with sinew and bone, its elongated fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws that gleamed malevolently in the dim light. A guttural growl reverberated from the creature's chest, sending a shockwave of fear through our small group. I could feel my companions trembling beside me, their breaths coming in shallow gasps as we stood frozen in terror. The Wendigo's eyes bore into mine, a chilling intelligence lurking within their depths. It sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it seemed to assess us with a predatory gaze. I knew then that we were nothing more than prey to this ancient evil, mere morsels to sate its insatiable hunger. With a sudden surge of movement, the Wendigo lunged forward, its movements swift and unnatural as it closed the distance between us in a blur of motion. Instinct took over as I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal the creature's twisted form in stark detail. Its pallid skin was stretched taut over its skeletal frame, veins pulsing beneath the surface like writhing serpents. Without hesitation, Tom sprang into action, brandishing a makeshift weapon he had fashioned from a broken piece of wood. The sound of his defiant shout echoed off the walls of the tunnel as he thrust the crude spear toward the Wendigo, aiming for its heart with unwavering determination. The Wendigo's antlered head jerked to the side with an eerie grace, narrowly avoiding Tom's strike. In retaliation, it lashed out with a clawed hand, swiping at him with blinding speed. Tom stumbled backward, a gash appearing on his forearm where the creature's claws had grazed his flesh. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me, yet I stood frozen in shock as our group amid panicked screams. I watched in horror as the creature turned and finished what it had started, devouring Tom alive, his cries reverberating in a sickening chorus of death. I finally broke and ran headlong into the darkness, the sounds of the others fading behind me. Yet I can hear the occasional scream, some further, some closer. The beast is finishing us off. I don't know if my story will make it out of here, but I don't think I will. Fourth story, Wendigo stories. When I was young, I often spent parts of summers with my grandmother in her home out in the country. It was my favorite place in the world, and I always looked forward to the week-long stays of gardening, baking, late-night fires with s'mores and ghost stories, and enjoying having my grandmother all to myself. There was a pond, not far from her house, where I would sometimes go to swim. It was home to quite a few frogs, and at night they made the most incessant noises. I complained to my grandmother only once, saying I couldn't enjoy the night breeze with all that racket. She took me on her lap and told me a story about an old man and woman who lived near a lake. The old man couldn't stand the singing of the frogs, but his wife told him that they kept the Wendigo away, and to harm them would be unwise. Well, he didn't listen, and set about methodically catching all the frogs on the lake. It was a process that took some time, but he did not stop until he had rid the lake of the pesky amphibians. That night, without the protection of the frogs, he and his wife were slaughtered by the Wendigo, a vicious, whip-like demon creature with elongated fingers ending in razor-sharp talons, and rows of silver teeth as thin and keen as needles. I wrote it off as another of her ghost stories, though she seemed more serious than usual about it. I never complained about the frogs again, mostly because I grew to enjoy them and put the story out of my mind. In fact, I'd forgotten all about it until it came up this past spring in a Native American literature class I was taking in college. The mention of the Wendigo sparked that old memory of my grandmother's story. I thought she had made up the word. I didn't realize there were stories about it, originating in Algonquian legends. Eager to connect something from my childhood to the topic, I Googled it, only to find that my grandmother had apparently been mistaken. There was nothing I could find about the story she had told me, nor any references of frogs providing protection from the Wendigo. In fact, the Wendigo of legends seemed very little like my grandmother's version. They were said to be insatiable, craving human flesh, and sometimes created from the forms of people who had resorted to cannibalism to survive. Descriptions varied, but they sounded almost nothing like my grandmother's bogeyman version. I actually chucked as I read it, almost a bit embarrassed by how badly my grandmother had messed up the original tale. I changed residences this summer, moving to a newly built, 1,000 square foot, on each side, duplex on the edge of town. The other side is to be occupied by my landlady, who'd had the place built. However, she isn't scheduled to move the rest of her stuff in and begin living there for a couple of weeks. She's waiting for her lease to end. Even though my new place is only a few minutes from the edge of town, it feels much more isolated. I enjoy the seclusion of my new home and its proximity to a more natural setting. I'm surrounded by woods, and from my patio, I can even see a pond beyond the carefully landscaped lawn, which is meticulously carved out from the surrounding woodlands. Just like the pond near my grandmother's house, the frogs have put up a ferocious racket lately. I prefer not to pay to run my air conditioning if I can help it, so I have every window open to catch a breeze. That means that I can hear them as clearly as if I were standing on the water's edge. It took a few days to get used to the noise, but I'm fine now, just like I was those summers when I was young. In fact, the noise has been comforting to me during the stress of the move. Tonight is different. I find myself standing in my living room, staring at where the pond is, though I can't see it in the dark. The air is eerily still and oppressively warm, but all my windows are shut, and I feel impossibly cold. I'd long since convinced myself that my grandmother's story had been a silly tale, a twisting of an old legend by irreverent storytellers. But for some reason, I have the most overwhelming sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. I don't know what to do.
I'm trapped.
Leaving my house means braving the darkness beyond my home, but I don't know if I'm going to be safe in here either. The frogs have stopped singing. Fifth story. If you find yourself in the forests of Europe, this could save your life. Full disclosure, I was an anti-masker during COVID. No, it wasn't because they infringed on my freedoms, or that I found it hard to breathe. It was just that masks made my assignment at the time rather difficult. I'm a mercenary, a gun for hire. I contract out through a shadowy outfit based in DC up until 2020. My jobs had all been sandy: the Sahel, Somalia, Afghanistan. Poor places where the big governments like to play war. My jobs were the dirtiest of the dirty work. I did missions that militaries wanted to be able to distance themselves from if something went wrong. It was only a matter of time before I got a fucked up contract like I did in Romania. A memo came in from Bucharest asking for a dozen American contractors with combat experience. I didn't ask questions. The paycheck was enormous for what seemed like a cakewalk compared to keeping up the West's war of terror or shit. I mean on terror. Yeah, that's it. War on terror. All 12 of US were given different arrival dates. When I landed in Romania, 6 soldiers from America were already there, and I suspected I'd be meeting up with them, but none of my suspicions turned out right. Upon landing, I was put into a taxi hired by the government, and after several hours without so much as a pee break, I'm stepping out of the car all groggy with my black duffels and rifle crate. A swath of great forest runs through Romania, following the Carpathian Mountains like a backwards L. I was now near the head of that L, by the Ukrainian border. I could hardly believe my surroundings when I got there. I was expecting to join a tactical team for a briefing. What I found was a thatched roof shelter. It was wall-less, little more than a structure to give travelers shelter from the rain for a night. The shelter was stationed at the edge of the forest. It was some kind of checkpoint or resting point before you ventured any further into the woods. There was a single trail that snaked through the dark spruces behind it and disappeared deep into the forest. Something was off about this assignment, but my mind didn't linger on what. I stopped and breathed. The fragrance of the coniferous trees was a balm after 6 hours of smelling my cabbie's camels. But he himself wasted no time getting away from fresh air. The taxi driver slammed his door and sped off without a goodbye. A spatter of mud slapped onto me as the little car puttered away. I flicked a few globs of mud off my sleeves as I went to the shelter. There, an old man tended a fire, cross-legged, while 2 gray-muzzled sheep dogs rested their chins on his legs. I did not speak Romanian. I reviewed the emailed instructions I received. All they said was speak to Boyan once I arrived at the destination. I knew I wasn't being played. My contractor has a system to verify all communications. It was confirmed that the Romanian government had wanted me here. But why? Boyan? I asked and waited for an answer. The old man nodded. Sit, please. He gestured at a dry spot of dirt across the fire. I moved my bags in under the shelter and Saturday. I'm not sure I'm in the right place. Oh, you are. Where are the other soldiers? It is just you and me. I laughed and shook my head. And what's our objective? I take it there's a terrorist outpost in these woods? I pointed at the trees. Or are we after wolves attacking a shepherd's herd? The old man just stared at me until I blushed and looked away. His expression was a quiet condemnation of my arrogance. When his silence had properly highlighted the stupidity of my last sentence, he spoke. There are many tribes in these woods. They choose to live a life unspoiled. They cut wood, carry water, catch fish. They shun the cities to live in the woods. He broke a few sticks in half and fed them to the fire. The dogs watched the new kindling crackle and burn before gently closing their eyes again. It wasn't always like that. One tribe was so cruel, so cunning. They were the parasites. They took what other tribes had instead of making things of their own. They had no fishermen, no smiths, no weavers. Only killers. This tribe, they adapted to kill and feed on humans. They grew fangs. I nodded my head up knowing where this was going. It wasn't Vlad the Impaler, but these sick beings that began the legends of Dracula. I see, I said, skeptically. Well, you will come too. Eventually, when nearly every tribe was wiped out, the parasite vanished. Some say the devil took them to be his demons. Others say that they crawled into the earth to hibernate until more people populated these woods so they could kill once more. But the truth of where they went, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that they're back. I stayed quiet for a moment, expecting him to laugh at my stoic expression, to say he was fucking with me, and that there was actually a terrorist cell hiding out in the caves. But instead, he kicked dirt on the fire and the dogs shot up and shook themselves off.
Come?
We have several miles to travel before we sleep. Take only what equipment you need. Rifle, ammo. Don't worry about food. I have plenty. He started off down the trail while I stayed sitting. I thought about walking to the nearest village and buying a ride back to the airport. This was ridiculous. But who was I to complain? After all, I was getting paid the same. I assembled my rifle, slung it over my shoulder, and left the plastic case behind. In the next few weeks, I learned the world was a much bigger place than I ever imagined. There were full-blown cities in these woods, each ringed with walls of spruces that had been sharpened to spikes and teeming with hundreds of inhabitants. They made their own clothes, soap, and cookware. It was like I had stumbled through a portal to the medieval ages. I stayed with Boyan off one of the main roads that connected the villages. He had a hut there, and I learned that his job was to act as a kind of highway patrol. He taxed trade between villages and made sure bandits weren't raiding the roads. But there was hardly any trade or traffic between villages when I started. The air was quiet with fear. Apparently, a family homestead had been attacked a month back. Holes were found on their necks, draining their bodies dry. The whispering and the rumors swirled that they were the parasite, but none of the attackers were seen. With so much wilderness patrolling, one road felt useless. But Boyan said the legends were true, and in order for the parasite to reach a village, they must be invited inside. They can't just sneak there through the woods. To be honest, the assignment didn't have my full attention. It felt like a joke. The other 11 contractors that were hired had the same job as me. They were assisting other patrols between villages. Boyan did have a radio, and no unusual activity had been reported by any on the sentries on the road. Until one by one, they went dark. It started further down the mountain range. First it was the outpost near the Serbian border. Then the woods of central Romania went quiet. It was making its way towards us. We used to get a wagon or two a day coming from the south, but all travel suddenly ceased. When the village caught word that communication with the south was gone, I thought they'd flee to the cities. Instead, they closed their shutters, barred their doors as soon as it was dusk, and loaded their rifles. It felt like something was coming. One day when Boyan and I were watching the road, a rickety wagon approached pulled by a pair of mules, their ribs bulging against their fur. Boyan and I looked at one another, and I shouldered my rifle, stepping out into the muddy road. With not much else to do, I had dived into learning Romanian my first few weeks here. While I couldn't much speak it or read it, I could understand the gist of Boyan's conversations at this point. He did most of the talking while I stood tall and menacing with the rifle across my chest. The protocol for our road patrol was simple. Check the teeth of all persons to make sure they didn't have fangs, and second, make sure there are no stowaways in the cargo. This sometimes meant going through sacks of wool or piles of potatoes, but so far, we hadn't turned up anything. The driver wore a mask and stopped the mules. The beasts stood dumbly in the road, blinking lazily. "What is your business on these roads?" asked Boyan. I looked at the wagon. There were 4 women in the back, wrapped tight in coats. Their shawls covered their faces. "We are fleeing before the storm in the south can reach us." Boyan walked closer and I followed. "What do you know about what's happening in the south?" "Something is coming. We intend to cross the border and stay in the wilderness until this evil has passed. Well, you can go no further without inspection." As we expected, Boyan gestured for me to go to the back of the wagon. The women all wore masks, too. This was 2020, and COVID was taken seriously here. The people knew if there was an outbreak in any of these remote villages, there would be hardly anything town doctors could do, and many would die. "Teeth," I said, and held my mouth open in a smile with my pointer fingers. One by one, the women pulled the heavy shawls up over their eyes and showed me their upper teeth. But even before I looked for fangs, something about their movement bugged me. They moved rigidly, robotically, like there was something wrong with their arms. The women held their mouths open funny, too. Their lips were pushed and curled up so I could see. They didn't smile like you would for a dentist, but there were no fangs. The last 2 women who showed me their mouths had fresh blood running from their gums. I indicated that they could let their masks down and walked over the Boyan. I pushed him back a few steps so we were out of earshot of the driver and whispered in his ear. "No fangs, but something seems off. Some of the women, their gums are bleeding. That is not uncommon, especially when travelers know we're checking teeth. They brush them hard to be polite. But I agree they are strange, but they don't look like parasite. Their teeth, they are real. But what if they stole regular people's teeth?" Boyan gave me a funny look. "Did it look like that to you?" I thought back, and to be honest, it didn't. Their teeth hadn't been replaced, and if they had, the parasite were phenomenal dentists. "No," I said. "May we go to the village?" asked the driver. Boyan and I looked to each other. We were both on edge. If it weren't for our anxiety, it was possible we might have found nothing out of the ordinary with this inspection to begin with. Boyan waved them on. You may go. Safe travels. The driver raised one arm in farewell, and Boyan and I both watched him with skeptical squints. There it was again, that strange robotic movement. We stood in the road while the mules plodded on, listening to the cart moan and creak until they were up the hill and out of sight. That night, Boyan and I ate supper in silence. I was getting paid weekly, so there was no completion clause for my contract. I remember I was thinking about leaving that very night when Boyan and I looked up at the same time. There was a sound on the wind, a wailing. We burst outside of his hut where the noise was clear. The nearest village was almost 3 miles up the road, but we heard the screams clear as day. I started gathering my things and Boyan was already sprinting. As we got closer, we smelled smoke and could see the orange glow of flames flicker in the sky. In the time it took to get there, the screams had ceased. The gate to the village was left wide open, invitingly. Boyan and I slowed and walked silently the rest of the way. The village still made noise. The fire leaping hut to hut was crackling, whistling, and roaring. We got to the mouth of the gate and I froze. My combat experience didn't prepare for this terror. There's speed to a firefight, a forgetfulness of fear. But this had me shaking like a child. There, inside just the gate, were the bodies of the coach that had passed by hours earlier. The man and the 4 women. Boyan bent and turned one of them over, and we both jumped back at how easily the corpse moved. It was weightless. I set my rifle barrel against the chest of one and prodded with it. The entire chest was empty.
No organs, no bones.
It was like that for all of them. Their legs and arms were hollow tubes. And their heads, they'd been cut in two and stitched back together. The parasite, I said aloud. They massacred them when they got to the village. They were already here, waiting for more people to come. No, said Boyan, stepping backwards. No. He started to sprint away into the woods. Trojan horse, he shouted back at me. Hey, wait. But I stayed still, realizing what he meant. It was why their movements were so mechanical earlier. It was why some of their gums leaked blood. The parasite had emptied these humans out, spooned out every last ounce of flesh, and stuffed themselves inside. I said while beginning to follow Boyan. You see, it was our fault. We were the ones that had let them in. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.